we have George Anthony Giannoumis, who's an associate professor, a social entrepreneur, and he's an internationally recognized expert in universal design of information and communication technology, and conducts state-of-the-art research on implementing universal design principles in practice. Anthony has led and participated in several large-scale research and innovation projects based in over 17 countries. He's also acted and worked a lot with diversity and inclusion projects and area as well. So welcome, Anthony.
Thank you so much, Kaman, and thank you all, everyone, for coming today and for engaging with this really important topic. Just to start off with, to highlight kind of some of the themes that I want to draw out in my work, is this issue of kind of a global scope and an international kind of framework for understanding some of the work that we're doing. And I'll highlight this with just a simple example. Yesterday, I had a wonderful meeting and a conversation with a colleague of mine. She is a member of a board of directors for one of the national newspapers in Jamaica. Now, this is a board primarily made up of people who are people of color. And she was advocating for a change in the style guide so that the word Black wasn't used only as a negative connotation. And should be an easy sell, especially in Jamaica. Shouldn't have been too tough to kind of say, hey, let's use the word Black as a descriptive, not as a negative connotation, which a lot of times we use it in things like blacklist, for example. And she got pushback from the chair of the board. He said, but then we have to use the word green differently, and we have to use blue differently, and yellow and orange. And he just completely missed the point. So this, yes, it's a Norwegian issue, but it's also a global issue. And especially as people, as journalists are out creating content, creating digital content that's available and accessible to the entire world, I think it's extremely important that we take a broader perspective to what we're doing so that we can avoid some of the inequalities that the previous generations have created by looking at our audiences in a very one-dimensional way. So this is all about looking at our audience in a multi-dimensional way. And the word here is universal design. Now, universal design is a global movement. It's something that has been started as a kind of niche topic beginning in the United States back in the 1990s and has spread all over the world. This is an idea, a topic that I've dedicated my life and my career to because I believe it is essential for transforming the way we think and the way we act. The United Nations has also picked up universal design. It is enshrined in our human rights, but it's also one of the key kind of principles behind some of their flagship initiatives. So the World Summit on the Information Society declares that the sharing and strengthening of global knowledge can be enhanced by universal design. And that's kind of what we as journalists are really wrapped up in, is sharing knowledge. Universal design has a very specific, but a very kind of transformative idea behind it. It's the design of, and we're going to talk about technology here, but you can think of it as content. You can think of it as the articles and the videos and the pictures that you produce. The design of technology to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Now, all of that fancy lingo comes down to three key ideas here. What we create should be usable. Usability should extend to everyone, and that it shouldn't require us to do any kind of magic fixes once it's been created. It should just basically work out of the box for everyone. I want to unpack a couple of these terms. First of all, design. Now, a lot of people think universal design is about creating something that is kind of universally available. And in one sense, it is. But in another sense, universal often refers to the design process. So we can think of design itself in a very universal way. So we can think about systems design. So when we talk about educational systems, or we talk about media systems, we can think on a systems level about how these things are being created. We can think about policy design. So we're all in one way or another involved in policy advocacy or trying to promote a specific policy agenda. So we can think about that as a design. This is product design, how we create the technologies and the content that we create. And finally, interface design. I think of that as kind of the micro level, the person interacting with a piece of technology. What does that look like? So it's really important that we take a plural view of this idea of design, and we don't kind of segregate it into only being about the way the content's displayed on the screen, or only being about the way we create a new piece of content. It's a very large scale as well as a micro scale issue. And it comes down to intention. So it's all about focusing the kind of light of inquiry, the light of investigation on our processes, on our procedures. Second key term here is this idea usable. Now, usability is kind of, we all get it, but it actually has a specific definition. It comes down to three key components. One, effective. Can I effectively do what it is I set out to do? So in the world of media, can I go and consume that media successfully? Or do I try to and fail miserably, or try to and it just becomes arduous and annoying, and you just effective? But here we're making how long it takes me to do something. Media websites are terrible about this because you have to wade through so much content before you actually get to what it is that you're trying to find, whether that's ads, whether that's a homepage that has 150 stories on it at once. Give the user, give the individual a very clean line to get to what they want to do. And the last, and this is probably the hardest thing to do, is satisfying. At the end of the day, when I've reached my goal, am I maybe not happy, but at least just content? But certainly I should not be frustrated or angry at the process of consuming that content. And I think it's something we can use as kind of a guiding light for how we approach this idea of design. Third issue here, and Melanie did such a great job on highlighting the ways in which we can understand the experiences of other people in the world. And this issue of all people and the definition of universal design is critical for that, because it's easy for us to kind of think very simplistically about all people. It's just everyone. And I hear this a lot from people who are kind of creating media. Oh, I'm just designing it I'm creating it for the general public. I love absolutely meaningless. So we really need to unpack what it is to be a member of all people, to be an individual that is representative of all people. Now, universal design, one of the key kind of solutions that it's driving is bridging what are called the digital divides. Now, research shows that in society, certain groups of people have easier access and use of technology than others. And it's almost universal across the board. Every country experiences this in some way, shape, or form. So these are kind of what you would expect. Older people have lower levels of access and use of technology than younger people. People with disabilities have lower levels of access and use of technology than people without disabilities. Women and girls have lower access and use of technology than men and boys. And I know you're thinking, but Norway, women and men are equal. Yes, and they still experience disparities. Same thing with racial ethnic minorities, same thing with the LGBT community. It's cuts across the board. Any area of human society that you see inequality or disparity, you also find inequality and disparity when it comes to access and use of technology. Now let's get into this universal design idea, and let's dig into the key principles behind this piece of work. So there's four aspects I want to dig into. Number one, social equality. Number two, human diversity. Melanie already addressed both of those really, really well, so I won't try to do any more than she's already done. She summed it up perfectly. But I will get into this accessibility and usability idea, and I will get into what I call participatory processes, because these are the more on-the-ground practical considerations that as journalists and as content creators, we can really think about. So let's just start off with this framework of designing technology that everyone can use equally. What we want is everyone to have an equal chance, a reasonable equal chance at achieving success. Now, my students come at me and they say, okay, then we should all get A's, right? No, that's not what we're talking about when we talk about equality. It's a reasonable chance for success. What we have is certain groups of people are disadvantaged to the point that they have little to no chances for balancing these issues in a way of making sure that everyone is starting off more or less on the same starting point or on the same, have the same chance for success. And what that comes down to is that when we're creating the content that we create, we need to think in those terms. Who are the people who are being left out of the mix? Who are the people who might experience a barrier accessing and using this content? When we start to sensitize ourselves to those different groups, then it enables us to rethink our approach. The other issue I get with universal design is everybody says, oh, it's going to cost me so much to universally design things. But a lot of it is just mental. It's purely cognitive. If you can change your mind about the way you approach the content you're creating, it can transform the work that you're doing, and it costs nothing to change your mind. All right, diversity. As Melanie said, diversity is getting thrown around quite a bit. It's kind of the buzzword of the day, but I really think of diversity in one key facet. When we're talking about diversity, we're not talking about individual groups. These matter, and these are really important to be able to identify the different characteristics that may disadvantage someone or disenfranchise someone. But it's also equally important, if not more important, to understand that the issue of diversity cuts across all groups. And we take into account overlapping forms, overlapping systems of oppression and discrimination and disadvantage, then a person who has multiple disadvantages will experience far greater barriers than any disadvantage on their own. Now, let me use an example now. So a woman with a disability will experience barriers to accessing content or to participating in society because of her disability as well as her gender. So in that way, her experience is vastly different than a man with a disability or a woman without a disability. So it's the whole idea behind intersectionality, and we start looking at the different that I take into this issue of diversity, not treating people superficially, treating the whole person, trying set on a video game setting of easy. And then there are people who are born into some disadvantage or underprivilege, and they can have life setting on medium. And then you have people who have multiple disadvantages who experience intersectional forms of discrimination and disenfranchisement, and they have the life setting on hard. And it's important to take that away from this understanding, because when you're trying to create content, reaching out to the people who have life set on easy is no problem. But if you can hit the people who have life set on hard, then you're going to capture everybody's experience in that process. So it's really about understanding the lived experiences of people who are fully marginalized, who are marginalized in ways that others are not. Now, we already talked about usability: effective, efficient, satisfying. Accessibility and usability are intertwined. It's really important for us to understand that, because often we kind of isolate one in the other, and we say things like, oh, well, this group of people don't have access to the internet, so why should I care? Right? Why should I care if I'm publishing a media story online that this group doesn't have access to the internet? Well, they may not today, but tomorrow they may. And if they can't access your content because their level of digital skills isn't as high as what you anticipate, they out of your consideration when it comes to creating your content. So we have to understand accessibility and usability as intertwined dimensions of universal design. And what that means is it does no good to roll out internet access to a rural area if somebody can't use a computer. It does no good to provide access to a computer for someone if they're not able to use the web. And we have to think of these things as intertwined issues. Last, and is certainly not least, I leave it for last because it's the most important, is participatory processes. And I know journalism has this sense of objective view of society, and we want to set ourselves back. Researchers are the same way. Academics, I come from academia, we're the same way. When we want to think about the research on the world around us, we want to say, oh no, we're at a distance from whatever it is that's going on. We're just kind of looking at the problem from the outside. But you shouldn't. Your journalism will be better. Your research will be better if you're an active agent to the groups that you're working with. And that means collaboration. And that means bringing people in to the design process, to how you're creating a story or how you're creating content from the beginning. It's really important that it's not just something you drag somebody in at the end and show them an article and say, well, what do you think? Tell us if we're using the right language. But bringing them in at the beginning, when you're first conceptualizing what you're doing, and bringing them in throughout the process, working with them in collaboration, so they're not just isolated to one dimension of your work. So just a few takeaways for practical consideration. We need people who are aware and understand issues of social inequality. We need designers who can identify and eliminate the barriers to participation across the spectrum of the human experience. We need designers who can create and test for technologies that are usable and accessible. And we need designers who can collaborate with key stakeholders and what I call extreme users. These are those most marginalized groups that might experience the most disadvantages when it comes to accessing and using your content. Now, before I get any accusations of being a kind of utopian vision of the world, universal design will not solve the fundamental issues of inequality. It is simply a framework of understanding how we can approach the world around us, how we can approach the intentional creation of the content and the technologies that we are creating. So I like to say technology provides the means, universal design provides the way, and us, provide the will. I will invite everyone to please join my Universal Design Co-Creation Network at universal.design. Plug that URL into your browser and you can sign up. It is free. Follow me on social media. I'm in all of them now. I just joined TikTok yesterday, so it's been a very exciting last couple of days. So I'd enjoy everyone to connect with me there. And lastly, my website, dranthony.design, is the place that you can get access to my podcast and my YouTube channel. So you can check me there as well. And if we have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, I'm here.